I want to start today by putting you in a very specific place. It's a place that smells of salt water, wet reeds, and just desperation. We're on Sichuan Island, about 14 kilometers off the southern coast of China. The date is December 3rd, 1552.
It is a bleak setting, and you have to remember this isn't some tropical paradise. It's a smuggling outpost. It's winter. The wind is just cutting through the walls of this tiny, hastily constructed hut.
And inside that hut, lying on a mat, is a man who is, he's arguably one of the most famous figures in European history, yet he is dying in almost total obscurity. He's 46 years old. He's delirious with fever. And he is staring out of the ocean, waiting for a boat that he must know, deep down is never going to come.
That image strikes such a chord because of the contrast. It's just so powerful. You have this man, Francis Xavier, who is known to history as the Apostle of the Indies. He's a giant. He co-founded the Jesuits. His name is on the front of universities in Ohio, high schools in New York, cathedrals in Australia. But in this moment, he's just a sick man in the dirt, accompanied only by a Chinese interpreter named Antonio and a servant from Malabar.
It's such a lonely end. But the journey to that hut is what we are deep diving into today. Because to get from a castle in Spain to a reed hut off the coast of China, Francis Xavier had to live about 10 different lives.
And that is the key theme for this discussion, I think. It's not just a travelogue, a list of places he went. It is a case study in adaptability. Francis Xavier was the ultimate improviser.
Right.
He was a man who constantly had to rewrite his own operating manual. Every single time he thought he had figured out how to be a missionary, he would move to a new culture that just told him, everything you know is wrong.
I love that framing. It's all about the pivot. How do you go from debating philosophy in Paris to ringing a bell in the streets of India to, wearing silk robes in Japan?
Yeah. And how do you do it all when you were never even supposed to be the guy in charge in the first place? Because that's the twist we'll get to. Xavier was the backup plan.
The famous Plan B. So, okay, let's rewind. We need to understand the raw material before we see how it was shaped. We're going back to 1506, to the Kingdom of Navarre.
Yes, and we have to be careful not to just say Spain. Navarre was its own independent kingdom straddling the Pyrenees. And Francis wasn't born Francisco Xavier. He was born Francisco de Jasso y Azpilicueta. And he was not born in a hut.
No, the source material really emphasizes this. He was born in the castle of Xavier.
This is absolutely crucial for his psychology. He was born into the high nobility. His father, Juan de Jasso, wasn't just some rich guy. He was a doctor of law and the finance minister to the King of Navarre. His mother was the sole heiress to the castle.
Wow.
So Francis grew up surrounded by stone walls, towers, servants, and a sense of, invincibility.
He was a child of privilege.
Absolute privilege, but also military power. His family was deeply, deeply involved in the defense of the realm. But as so often happens in history, geography is destiny. Navarre was just squeezed between two giants, France and the rising power of Castile and Aragon, what we now think of as Spain.
And the bubble bursts.
Violently. In 1512, when Francis is just 6 years old, Ferdinand of Aragon invades. This is an annexation. It's a conquest. The Xavier family naturally backs the legitimate King of Navarre, which turns out to be the losing side.
So the war comes home. Literally.
It destroys the home. This is the first major trauma of his life, no question. After a failed uprising in 1516, the Spanish governor, a man named Cardinal Cisneros, decides to break the spirit of the Navarrese nobility for good. He orders the slighting of the castles.
Slighting? That sounds so polite, but it wasn't, was it?
Not at all. It means military castration. It's a brutal term. Soldiers arrived at the castle of Xavier. They tore down the outer defensive walls. They filled in the moat so it couldn't be defended. They smashed the towers. They literally lowered the height of the keep by half.
I'm just picturing a 10-year-old Francis watching this. Watching his family's symbol of power and identity being dismantled stone by stone.
It turned a fortress into a farmhouse. It was a calculated public humiliation. And right in the middle of all this, his father dies. His brothers are off fighting a guerrilla war in the mountains. The family is stripped of its military capability and its political future is just gone.
So if you're Francis and you're growing up in the ruins of this castle, what does that do to your ambition? You can't be a general anymore. You can't be a finance minister to a king who doesn't exist anymore.
You look for another ladder, and for a young nobleman with no military future, the church was the traditional path to power. And I mean power in the worldly sense. You could become a bishop, a cardinal, a diplomat. You could restore the family honor through the ecclesiastical hierarchy.
So he packs his bags and heads to Paris.
The University of Paris, 1525. the intellectual center of the Western world. And Francis completely reinvents himself. He arrives at the College Saint Barbe, and he is just determined to succeed.
But not as a saint.
Oh, definitely not. The accounts from this time describe him as worldly. He was ambitious, very proud of his noble lineage, and apparently quite the athlete.
An athlete.
A high jumper.
A high jumper. You're kidding.
It's a funny detail, isn't it? But it fits the profile. He was physically gifted, energetic, charismatic. He apparently spent money he didn't really have just to keep up appearances. He was trying to prove he was still a somebody, despite what happened to his castle.
And then the universe plays a joke on him. It assigns him a roommate.
2 roommates, actually. He's sharing lodgings with his friend Pierre Favre. And then a new student moves in, an older man named Ignatius of Loyola.
And this dynamic, I mean, you couldn't write it. It's cinematic. You have Francis, 23 years old, young, athletic, arrogant, and then Ignatius, 38, limping from an old war wound and completely, utterly obsessed with God.
It was a clash of cultures, a total clash. Ignatius had been a soldier, a real one. He had his leg shattered by a cannonball at the Battle of Pamplona, and during his long recovery, he had this massive spiritual conversion. So he came to Paris not to climb the ladder, but to learn theology so he could serve souls. He was intense, he was austere.
And Francis hated him.
Oh, he couldn't stand him. The sources say Francis actually regarded Ignatius as a joke. He mocked him. He was sarcastic about Ignatius's efforts to guide other students spiritually. You can just hear the sneer in the history books. Francis probably thought, who is this washed-up cripple trying to tell me how to live my life?
It's the classic cool guy versus the religious nerd dynamic.
Yeah.
So how did Ignatius crack the armor? Because Francis Xavier does not sound like an easy sell.
It was a war of attrition. It definitely helped that their buffer, their friend Pierre Favre, left for a while to visit family. That left Francis alone with Ignatius.
Basically. And Ignatius was incredibly emotionally intelligent. He didn't just come in preaching. He saw that Francis was vain and needed validation. So Ignatius praised him. He actually helped Francis financially when Francis blew through his allowance.
He killed him with kindness.
And then, once the defenses were down, he deployed the weapon. He kept asking one question over and over again.
What will it profit a man?
What will it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul?
Which is such a direct attack on Francis's entire project. Francis was there specifically to gain the world, to get that status back.
Exactly. Ignatius was holding up a mirror. He was saying, okay, Francis, let's play this out. Let's say you get the bishopric. Let's say you store the castle.
Yeah.
Then you die. Then what? It took time, but the logic and the sheer sincerity of Ignatius's life eventually broke through. Francis surrendered. The ambition didn't disappear. It just changed targets. Instead of conquering the world for the house of Xavier, he would conquer it for Christ.
And that leads to this incredible scene in the crypt. August 15th, 1534. The crypt of Saint Denis on Montmartre. This is the foundational moment. 7 students, Ignatius, Francis, Pierre Favre, and 4 others gather there in secret. They take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. This is the nucleus of what becomes the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits.
But here's the thing that always surprises me. They take these vows, they form this brotherhood.
Yeah.
But they aren't planning to go to India or Japan. Not even close.
No. If you had asked Francis Xavier in 1534 where he would end up, he would have said Jerusalem. The plan was to go to the Holy Land. They wanted to convert the infidels on the ground where Jesus walked. It was a very medieval, almost crusade-like aspiration.
So they weren't thinking globally yet. Their vision was very narrow, very focused on the Middle East.
Correct. And they actually tried to go. They all traveled to Venice, waiting for a ship to take them. But a war broke out between Venice and the Ottoman Empire, which meant no ships were sailing.
Oh, man.
They waited a year. Nothing.
So they're stuck in a holding pattern.
And this is the first great pivot for the group. They couldn't go to Jerusalem, so they went to Rome and offered their services directly to the Pope. They basically said, we had a plan, it failed, send us wherever you need us.
And in 1540, the Pope says, okay, I approve your order. And almost simultaneously, a letter arrives from the King of Portugal.
King John III. He has this massive, sprawling maritime empire in the east, but it has a spiritual problem. He's hearing these reports that the Portuguese settlers are living lives of absolute debauchery, and the work of evangelization is completely stalled. He needs shock troops. He asks the Pope for missionaries.
And the Pope turns to Ignatius. Now, Ignatius has his guys. Who does he pick?
He picks his best. He chooses Nicholas Bobadilla and Simon Rodriguez. These are the guys for the job. Tough, experienced.
And Francis Xavier is not on that list.
He is not. Francis was serving as the secretary for the new order. He was handling the correspondence. He was the admin guy. He was essential to the bureaucracy in Rome.
So the bags are packed. The Portuguese ambassador's waiting. The whole mission is ready to go. And then catastrophe.
Nicholas Bobadilla gets sick. Very sick. The sources are a bit vague, but he's totally bedridden. He absolutely cannot endure a 6-month sea voyage. It would kill him.
This is the moment. The plan B moment.
It is. The ambassador is literally about to leave Rome. Ignatius has no time to vet anyone else. He calls Francis into his office. You can imagine the heavy-hearted Ignatius loved Francis, and he knew that sending him to India meant they would never, ever see each other again.
And he just says, what, you're up?
He simply said, Bobadilla cannot go. You must go.
And Francis.
He reportedly said, here I am. That's it. He patched his old cassock, grabbed his breviary, a catechism, and a single book of instructions, and he left the next day.
It gives you chills, because if Bobadilla doesn't eat a bad shrimp or catch a fever, Francis Xavier stays in Rome. We don't get the letters from Japan. We don't get the global network. The entire history of the Catholic Church in Asia hinges on a stomachache.
It's the ultimate lesson in contingency. The greatest missionary of the modern era was a substitute teacher.
So he goes. He travels overland to Lisbon, stays there for a while, and finally departs on his 35th birthday, April 7th, 1541. He is now the Apostolic Nuncio to the East.
Which is a very lofty title. It means he is the Pope's personal representative in the entire East. But as he's about to find out, titles don't stop scurvy, and they certainly don't stop pirates.
The journey itself is a complete nightmare. It takes over a year. He finally arrives in Goa in May 1542. Now, I want to unpack Goa. Because when we say missionary arrives in India, we assume he starts preaching to the locals. But that wasn't his initial target at all, was it?
No. His primary mission, his first job, was to fix the Europeans. We have to de-romanticize Portuguese India here. This wasn't a colony of pious pilgrims. It was a trading post staffed by what the contemporary sources describe as riffraff.
Riffraff.
You had convicts released from jail to serve in the army. You had disaffected nobility trying to make a quick fortune, adventurers, mercenaries.
It was like a Wild West boomtown.
Exactly. The moral situation was described as scandalous and undisciplined. The Portuguese men were taking multiple local women as concubines, they were enslaving people, they were ignoring math, they were essentially living as petty warlords. The King of Portugal was deeply embarrassed. He sent Xavier to be the sheriff.
But Xavier shows up. He's just one guy in a tattered robe. He can't arrest anyone. So how do you clean up an entire city of rough men like that?
This is where we see his emotional intelligence again. He doesn't start by screaming from the pulpit and condemning everyone. He starts with service. He moves into the royal hospital. He spends his days washing the sores of lepers and sick soldiers. He sleeps on the floor next to the dying.
He earns their respect through pure grit.
Precisely. It's very hard to mock a man who is wiping up your vomit. And then once he has their attention, he uses what we call the bell ringer method.
I love this detail.
He realized the adult men were cynical and hard to reach. So he went for the next generation. He would literally walk through the streets of Goa ringing a handbell. The noise attracted the children, the curious, and the servants. Once he had a crowd, he'd lead them to the church and teach them songs, prayers, and the catechism.
He weaponized the children.
In a way, yes. These kids would go home and sing the prayers at the dinner table. They would ask their parents questions. They would essentially shame their parents into piety. It was a grassroots, bottom-up strategy, and it actually worked. The atmosphere in Goa began to shift.
But Goa was just the headquarters. The real frontier was south, wasn't it? The Pearl Fishery Coast.
Right, Cape Comorin. This is where he encounters the Pauravas, and this part of the story requires some nuance because it touches on the complex politics of conversion.
Right, because the Pauravas were already baptized when Xavier arrived.
Yes, about 20,000 of them, which is a huge number. But it wasn't a sudden spiritual awakening. About 10 years prior, the Pauravas were being decimated by Arab fleets and local Hindu warlords who all wanted to control the valuable pearl beds.
They were getting crushed.
They were desperate. So they asked the Portuguese for protection. And the Portuguese said, "We will bring the gunboats if you become Christians."
It was a transaction. Baptism for battleships.
That's a crude way to put it, but it's accurate. The Pauravas agreed. They got baptized en masse. The Portuguese Navy chased away the Arabs, but, and here is the massive catch, nobody stayed behind to teach them anything. So Xavier arrives 10 years later to find this huge population of Christians who don't know who Jesus is, don't know the creed and are still practicing all their traditional rituals.
But his job wasn't to convert them, it was to inform them, actually teach them what they'd signed up for.
And it was grueling, back-breaking work. He didn't speak Tamil. He describes this agonizing process of trying to translate the prayers with the help of some locals who knew a tiny bit of Portuguese. He would stand for hours and hours reciting, baptizing new infants until his arm was physically paralyzed from the repetition.
And it wasn't safe. I think people forget the physical danger involved.
It was incredibly dangerous. The local Brahmins and the rulers who had lost control of the pearl divers were furious. They saw Xavier as an agent of Portuguese imperialism, which, to be fair, he was. There were multiple attempts on his life. His hut was burned down. There's a famous account where he had to hide in the branches of a large tree while armed men searched the ground below for him.
The warrior priest imagery is strong here.
Yeah.
He's running, hiding, preaching.
And importantly, he was living with the poor. Unlike later Jesuits who would focus on the elites, Xavier was eating rice and water with the pearl divers. He slept on the sand. This gave him immense credibility with the lower caste, but it also cemented a certain image of what a missionary was supposed to look like. Poor, humble, suffering.
Keep that image in mind, the poor priest, because that is going to become a huge problem for him later. But first he keeps moving east. He's just restless.
He had a divine restlessness. In 1545, he heads to Malacca. This is modern-day Malaysia. It was the great crossroads of trade between India, China, and the Spice Islands, a truly global city. And here we get a glimpse of Xavier as a military asset.
The pirate battle. This feels like it belongs in an action movie.
It really does. In 1547, the Acehnese from Sumatra launched a surprise attack on Malacca. It was a massive raid. The Portuguese garrison was demoralized and heavily outnumbered. They were ready to just hole up in the fortress and wait it out.
And Xavier intervenes.
He went to the church, preached this fiery sermon, and essentially shamed and inspired the Portuguese to go out and fight. He prophesied victory, he rallied the troops, they sailed out to the Pearless River and won a decisive, shocking victory against the pirate fleet.
So now he's a war hero too. But Malacca is significant for another much bigger reason. This is where the trajectory of his entire life changes completely. He meets a man.
December 1547, he meets Anjuru.
Anjuru is Japanese, but he's not a diplomat or a merchant. He's a fugitive.
He is on the run. The story is that Anjuru had killed a man in Japan, possibly in a duel or a feud, and had to flee to save his own life. And he was just tortured by guilt. He had heard these rumors of a holy man from the West who could offer absolution.
I find this so fascinating. The door to Japan was opened by a murderer seeking redemption.
History loves irony, doesn't it? Anjuru managed to communicate with Xavier, likely using a mix of broken Portuguese and Malay. He described his homeland, but he didn't describe it as a land of savages or simple fisherfolk. He described a highly sophisticated, complex society.
What did he tell Xavier? What was the pitch?
He told him about the honor code, the literacy, the universities run by monks, the rule of law. Xavier was completely captivated. He asked the Portuguese merchants about it, and they confirmed it. They said the Japanese were very reasonable people, and he would do great service there.
So he asks Anjuru the key question.
He asks, if I went to Japan, would the people become Christians?
And Anjuru's answer was very specific, and it was a warning.
It was. He said, they will not become Christians immediately. They are a people who ask questions. They will look at your conduct. If your answers satisfy their reason and your conduct matches your words, then they will believe.
That is a direct challenge. He's saying, you can't just ring a bell here. You have to win the debate.
Exactly. Xavier realized this was a different league entirely. India was about charity and ritual. Japan would be about intellect and philosophy. He decided he had to go. He baptized Anjuru, who took the name Paulo de Santa Fe, and used him as his guide and interpreter.
So, 1549, he lands in Kagoshima on the southern island of Kyushu, the first Jesuit in Japan.
And this begins the most critical phase of his adaptability, because almost immediately, everything starts to go wrong.
Let's talk about the language, because Xavier didn't speak Japanese, and Anjuru wasn't a theologian, was he?
No, Anjuru was a warrior and a merchant. A good man, but not a scholar. He tried to translate Catholic concepts into Japanese concepts, and this led to the famous Daimyos disaster.
Unpack that for us. What exactly happened?
Well, Xavier needed a word for God, a singular, all-powerful creator. Anjuru, trying to be helpful, suggested the word Dainichi. To Xavier, it was just a word, so he started preaching in the streets, crying out, "Worship Dainichi. The truth is in Dainichi."
But to the Japanese, Dainichi meant something very, very specific.
Oh, yeah. Dainichi is the central deity of Shingon Buddhism, the Great Sun Buddha. It represents the cosmic truth, the essence of the universe. It is absolutely not a personal creator god who judges sin.
So when Xavier's yelling this, the Buddhist monks aren't angry.
They're
Happy.
They loved it. They welcomed Xavier into their temples. They thought, look at this, a wise man from India, which they saw as the birthplace of the Buddha, has come to preach a new sect of Shingon. They thought he was one of them.
It's a total comedy of errors. He thinks he's converting them. They think he's agreeing with them.
It took months for Xavier to realize the misunderstanding. When he finally figured out that Dainichi implied a pantheistic universe rather than a Christian creator, he was horrified. He had to pivot hard.
What did he do?
He stopped using the word completely. He switched to Durusu, which is just a Japanese phonetic approximation of the Latin deus, and he had to go back and explain, no, Dainichi is not God. Dainichi is actually a deception.
Oof. That must have gone over well.
It destroyed his relationship with the monks. They felt tricked, betrayed. They went from being his hosts to his bitter enemies. But it taught Xavier a valuable lesson. You cannot just copy-paste concepts. You have to understand the deep culture.
But language wasn't the only pivot. He also had to change his wardrobe, right?
This is the visual pivot. Remember how in India, his power came from his poverty? He wore tattered robes, he walked barefoot. That was the sign of a holy man there.
But in feudal Japan,
In feudal Japan, appearances were rigidly codified. Poverty was associated with impurity with the lower classes. When Xavier arrived in his rags looking like a beggar, he was treated with utter disdain. He tried to get a meeting with the daimyo, the warlord of Satsuma, but he was ignored. He looked like a vagrant.
so he realizes his brand is completely failing.
He reads the room. He realizes that to get respect, he has to play by Japanese rules. So when he travels to Yamaguchi to meet the ruler there, he orchestrates a total transformation.
The makeover.
It's a full makeover. He ditches the rags, he puts on a fine cassock, a surplice, and a stole. He gathers his attendants, about 30 of them, and dresses them in their best clothes. He presents himself not as a humble monk, but as the ambassador of the great Portuguese Empire.
And he brings gifts, too.
High-tech gifts, a striking clock, a musical instrument, eyeglasses, mirrors, things the Japanese had never seen before. He was bringing wonder.
And the result.
The doors flew open. The daimyo was incredibly impressed. He granted Xavier permission to preach. Xavier realized that evangelical poverty was a cultural barrier in Japan, so he just discarded it. That is the definition of adaptability. He kept the core message, but he completely changed the packaging.
But even with the fancy clothes, the intellectual battle was tough. You mentioned Anjiru's warning about questions.
The Japanese bombarded him with questions, and they weren't easy ones. They hit him with the classic problem of evil.
Which is?
They asked, if your God is good and all-powerful and created everything, why did he create the demons? Why did he create hell? If he's good, why is there evil?
I mean, that's a question theologians still struggle with today.
And they asked a very personal one that really hit home. If this truth is necessary for salvation, why did God leave our ancestors in darkness for so long? Are our beloved ancestors in hell?
Oof. That's a deal-breaker question, isn't it? Is my grandmother in hell?
And Xavier, bound by the theology of the time, basically had to say yes. The Japanese found this absolutely repulsive. They said, what kind of cruel God would create people just to damn them for ignorance? Xavier wrote back to Rome saying that these people were the delight of his heart because they were so rational, but they completely exhausted him. He couldn't rely on authority. He had to use logic.
He spends over 2 years in Japan. He establishes communities in Hirado, Yamaguchi, and Bungo. It's a success, but it's an unfinished success because he realizes something fundamental about the Japanese worldview.
He realizes that Japan looks up to China. For them, China was the big brother, the source of wisdom, writing, and religion. So Xavier starts to think strategically. He thought, if I can convert China, the Japanese will say, well, if the wise Chinese are doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
The kingpin strategy.
Yeah.
To win Japan, he has to win China first.
So the target shifts again. In 1552, he leaves Japan and sets his sights on the Ming Empire. But there's a problem.
A big problem. China is closed.
Hermetically sealed. The Ming dynasty had strictly forbidden foreigners from entering the mainland. The penalty was imprisonment or death.
But Xavier loves a loophole. What was his plan this time?
He decided to go legal. He would organize an official Portuguese embassy. He enlisted his friend, a wealthy merchant named Diogo Pereira. Pereira would be the ambassador, bearing gifts and tribute for the emperor. Xavier would go along as the apostolic nuncio. It was a perfect cover.
Legitimacy. Diplomacy. It should have worked.
It would have worked, but then human nature got in the way. Just pure pettiness.
We're back in Malacca.
They arrive in Malacca to refit their ship, the Santa Cruz, and they run into the captain of Malacca, a man named Álvaro de Ataíde da Gama.
Da Gama. That's a famous name.
He was the son of the legendary Vasco da Gama, but he was not a hero. He was a small-minded bureaucrat with a grudge. Apparently, he hated Diogo Pereira, and when he saw Pereira arriving with this fancy title of ambassador to China, he just got jealous.
So he pulls rank.
He sabotaged the whole thing. He seized the ship. He confiscated the gifts that were meant for the emperor. He stripped Pereira of his title. He forced the crew to resign. It was pure vindictive sabotage.
That is devastating. Sabotage by your own countrymen out of nothing but spite.
Xavier was furious. He actually produced his documents proving he was the papal nuncio and threatened to excommunicate da Gama on the spot. But da Gama didn't care. He had the guns.
So Xavier's left with nothing. No ambassador, no gifts, no official permit.
But he wouldn't give up. He took a skeleton crew and sailed to Shangchuan Island, the smuggling outpost where we started this whole story.
He's desperate now.
He's looking for a coyote. He's trying to find a Chinese smuggler who will hide him in a boat and drop him on the mainland at night. He found a man who agreed to do it for a massive amount of pepper, which was worth a fortune.
He was willing to be smuggled in like contraband.
He waited in that hut. Days turned into weeks. The smuggler never showed up. Maybe he was caught. Maybe he just got scared and took the payment and ran. We'll never know. And Xavier's health just collapsed. The fever took over.
And on December 3rd, 1552, Francis Xavier dies. He is 46 years old. He is looking at the coast of China, but he never touches it.
It feels like a tragedy, a total failure of the final mission.
But this is where the story takes a turn into the truly bizarre. Because Xavier dies, but his body keeps traveling.
This is section 7 of our outline, The Macabre Journey. And I have to warn you, this gets a little graphic.
It's the 16th century. Things are different.
So he dies. They bury him on the beach. But because they intend to eventually move his bones back to India, they want the flesh to decompose quickly. So they fill the coffin with quicklime.
Quicklime, which is caustic. It eats organic matter. It's designed to leave only bones.
Right. They packed him in lime, nailed the lid shut, and left him there.
2.5 months later, a ship arrives to collect the bones. They dig him up.
And they open the coffin expecting a clean skeleton. Instead, they find the body is whole. The lime hasn't worked at all. The body is fresh. There is no smell of decay. In fact, witnesses said it smelled sweet.
The incorrupt body. A classic sign of sainthood.
And to test this, and this makes me wince every time I read it, the captain actually took a tool and cut a slice of flesh from the knee.
He cut the body.
To see if it was just desiccated or mummified. It wasn't. It bled, fresh blood. They were completely astounded. They realized they had a miracle on their hands. They loaded the body onto the ship and took it to Malacca.
And in Malacca, the disrespect continues.
It's an absolute disaster. The clergy in Malacca didn't really care that much. They dug a grave near the church, but they didn't measure the coffin properly. The hole was too small.
Oh no, you can see where this is going.
Rather than digging it wider, they forced the body in. They shoved the head down so hard they broke his neck. They tamped the dirt down, smashing his nose flat against his face.
That is just horrific.
It is. Later, the Jesuits finally got permission to dig him up again and move him to Goa. They found the body was still incorrupt, but now it was physically damaged from that terrible burial.
So they finally get him to Goa in 1554.
Yeah.
And the reception is chaotic.
It's a mob scene, the viceroy, the nobles, thousands of people are there, but the crowd is out of control. One woman, in a frenzy of devotion, apparently bit off the toe of the saint to keep as a relic.
She bit off his toe.
History says yes, because a piece of a saint or relic was considered a direct conduit of divine power, and this obsession with relics leads to the official dismemberment later on.
Right. The church decides to share the wealth.
In 1614, the superior general of the Jesuits in Rome decided he wanted a piece of the founder. He specifically requested the right arm.
Why the right arm?
Because that was the arm that had baptized an estimated 30,000 people. It was seen as the instrument of salvation. So, in a secret ceremony in Goa, doctors surgically amputated the arm at the elbow.
And sent it to Italy.
It's in the Church of the Jesuit in Rome today, in a massive silver reliquary. But they didn't stop there. They took the shoulder blade for the Jesuit college in Macau. In 1620, they removed the intestines and all the internal organs to distribute to other Jesuit houses around the world.
They literally hollowed him out to send him around the globe.
It sounds gruesome to us, and it is, but think of the symbolism. Xavier wanted to go to all these places. He wanted to be a global missionary. In death, he became one physically. His body became a map of the Jesuit empire.
And today, the rest of him is still in Goa.
In the Basilica of Bom Jesus. He's in a glass and silver casket. He doesn't look like he did in 1553, though. He's mummified now, the skin is like parchment, the features are drawn, but he is still the center of a massive pilgrimage every 10 years.
Before we close, we do have to touch on the controversial side. We can't talk about Portuguese India in this period without talking about the Inquisition.
We must be objective here. There is a letter that Xavier wrote in 1546 to King John III. In it, he explicitly asks the king to establish the Inquisition in Goa.
Why? What was his reasoning?
He was deeply concerned about what he saw as Judaizing and crypto-Muslim practices among the new converts. He felt the faith was being diluted, that people were converting in name only. He wanted the state to enforce purity of doctrine.
And the Goa Inquisition, when it finally came, was brutal.
It was. It's a very dark chapter of history, but we have to get the timeline right. Xavier asked for it, but he died in 1552. The Inquisition didn't actually start and go until 1560, so Xavier never saw a trial, he never burned a heretic. But he did call for the institution. It shows us he was a man of his time, capable of immense charity towards the sick, but also holding the rigid intolerance of 16th century dogmatism.
It's the complexity of history. You can't just put him in a good or bad box.
No. He was a deeply complex, driven man.
So let's wrap this up by looking at the legacy. The numbers alone are staggering.
The best modern estimates are around 30,000 converts. That's one man walking and sailing in 10 years. But the bigger legacy is the network, the schools.
The Jesuits became the educators of the world.
And Xavier is the patron saint of that whole enterprise. But I want to go back to that final image, the unfinished mission.
China.
He died staring at it. By all accounts, a total failure. But here is the beautiful, ironic part. His death on that island inspired a mania in Europe. Young Jesuits heard the story of the lonely, tragic death of Francis Xavier, and they said, I want to finish what he started.
It was the ultimate recruitment poster.
Exactly. A few decades later, another Jesuit, Matteo Ricci, managed to enter China. He learned the language, he adopted the culture, he got to Beijing. He fulfilled Xavier's dream. And he did it because Xavier failed so dramatically and so poetically.
So what's the final takeaway for the listener, for the person driving to work right now listening to this?
For me, it's the power of Plan B. You have to remember, Francis Xavier was the backup. He wasn't the first choice. He wasn't even the second choice. He was the guy they grabbed at the last minute because the other guy had a stomachache.
And yet, he defined the role.
He took a second-string opportunity and played it like an absolute star. He didn't have a rigid plan. He had a rigid goal, but his methods were completely flexible. If poverty doesn't work, wear silk. If India is too chaotic, go to Japan. If Japan is too hard, go to China.
He never stopped moving. He never stood still.
He never stopped adapting. And in doing so, he showed that sometimes the path you're forced onto by accident is actually the path to greatness. Maybe the detours are the point.
That is a fantastic place to leave it. From a broken castle in Navarre to a silver casket in Goa, the story of Francis Xavier is the story of the ultimate pivot.
Indeed, it's an incredible life.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.